Welcome to this essay about steps to drafting your essay, brought to you from the Writing Center. There are many types of research papers and essays, so this video gives a general sense of steps you might take on the way to writing one. First, you need to analyze your assignment. What exactly are you being asked to do? Analyze a piece of literature, discuss strategies to mitigate food insecurity in Toronto during COVID-19, compare and contrast two films or two theorists or two authors' works. Apply a specific theory or perspective to a situation, an issue, or a text. What exactly is it you're supposed to do? Try to figure out the expectations for this assignment. Once you've analyzed what you're supposed to be doing and what the expectations are, then you start collecting data or evidence that's appropriate for your field and this paper. Types of evidence can be multiple. Types of evidence might include quotations from a work of literature or a theorist, might also include data that you've collected through oral interviews. It might include statistics, looking at government websites, for example, for population patterns, and so on and so forth. So you need to understand what evidence is appropriate for your course, your field, and this particular assignment. Generally speaking, once you have collected that evidence, you look for patterns in it. So what you're striving to find usually are the major patterns of importance that will answer the question that you've been asked. So you look at things like what fits together, how do you organize the data you've collected, what fits together, what doesn't fit together, what answers your question or helps to answer that question, and what doesn't. Move the data or the evidence that doesn't fit to one side and take a good close look at how you might organize what's left. Once again, I ask you to look for major patterns in it because those will become the main points in your paper or essay. You look for similarities and you group evidence together, or you look for a sequence of evidence that makes sense. Are you being asked to apply a theory to an issue, a situation, or a text? Then you need to read that theorist very carefully and make sure you understand the concepts or the perspective very thoroughly. You need to be able to describe that theorist in your own words, the major points and the perspectives. And once again, I would emphasize that whatever data or evidence you use for your paper has to be appropriate for your field and for the assignment. So just to be clear, a really important step in drafting any paper is to organize the evidence you've collected. Doesn't matter whether it's scientific data accumulated by running an experiment, or statistics that you've gathered, or the results of oral interviews, or quotations and such from a piece of literature. By organizing, that means that you group similar pieces of evidence that lead you to a main point. You are looking for several main points to discuss, and you're looking for a logical progression. Once you've grouped your evidence, which pieces of evidence should come first, second, third, fourth, etc. This organization and this sequencing can actually form the structure of the middle of your essay. Now, there are any number of ways to do this, and I will be going into that in a moment. Your next step, if you don't already have a question that's been given to you by your professor or that you have made up yourself, is to write a research question that you attempt to answer in this paper. You may be asked to write a draft thesis statement that's suggested by your evidence. Now, obviously, you have to have done some gathering of evidence before you can write a draft thesis statement. Remember that a thesis statement is the answer to the question that your assignment asks you. So drafting a thesis statement means you've done a partial analysis, you've come to a tentative conclusion or answer, and now you need to write that down. It's going to guide the organization of the middle of your paper. After you have gathered your evidence or collected your data, and you've also written that research question or that draft thesis that's going to guide the rest of your paper, the next step you should consider is creating some kind of a work plan that's going to structure the middle of your essay. These are highly personal. Different methods work for different people. Some professors may ask you to write a formal outline. That doesn't always work for everyone, though of course you can still hand that in after you've tried some of these other methods. So you can create a bullet point outline with major points and minor points. That of course allows you to see the order of the points that you're making and whether the minor points and the evidence fit within that. A second method that's not often mentioned is to draw a concept map. And that is start with your main idea in the center in a circle and draw your essay outside that center. You can go further than that. You can actually draw a diagram, or you can illustrate what you believe to be the main points of your essay if you're a visual-minded person. A strategy that works for me is to write each main point on a post-it note with minor points also on post-it notes, and then simply move them around to try the order. I try different orders before I decide on one. I would also point out that you can do this by using physical post-it notes in different colors. You can also use Google Jamboard, which provides digital post-it notes you can move around. You can also use different colors on it. So if you keep each main point and the minor points that belong to it on the same color of post-it note, then you will arrive at some kind of organization. You can also figure out your own digital or paper or whiteboard method. Some of my friends still insist on writing work plans on the backs of napkins in a spontaneous manner and then transferring that to a more formal outline. The important thing is that you have some idea of where you want to go and the points you want to make before you start writing. Keep in mind, you can always go back and change the order or change the points if you make an important discovery that you didn't figure out when you drew your concept map or major outline. I usually recommend that students give themselves enough time to write 2 drafts of a paper. In the first draft, you're striving to get your thoughts down on paper. Don't worry about grammar or writing beautiful sentences. Get your thoughts down. If you leave yourself enough time for a second draft, you can go back and revise the first one, straighten out the order, polish those sentences, and so on. Don't think you have to begin with the first sentence of the introduction. Instead, try beginning where you're comfortable. And frankly, that usually means starting somewhere in the middle of your essay. Here's a suggested way of working, and that is write to your evidence. Look at the evidence you've gathered and try putting a main piece of evidence or several that are somehow related, a quote or quotes or data or statistics on your screen or at the top of your note page. Then think about it. Start writing. What does that evidence tell us? What does that evidence mean in relation to your question? What does it answer. Generally speaking, you describe your evidence and you include it in the first part of the paragraph, and you then tell us what that evidence means. Once you've done that, you can go back and write an opening sentence for that paragraph that introduces the topic of the paragraph. Once again, get your thoughts down on the page without worrying about grammar or polishing your sentences. This draft is about thinking. Keep in mind, you don't have to begin writing with the introduction as long as you have a draft thesis or a specific question you're trying to answer. Once you have finished the middle, generally speaking, you then draft your conclusions. And one of the strategies that I use is to simply put up my thesis or research question at the top. I then write the middle. I write my conclusions. And only then, when I found a distinctive, definite answer to my thesis or question, only then do I go back and write the introduction, including revising the research question or the thesis statements to make sure that that ending and beginning match. If you're still stuck, here are some strategies to try. The first is brainstorming. Put your evidence up on the page or the screen and write for 10 minutes without stopping. Put a timer on your cell phone or your clock. Write without stopping about the answer to your question or what your evidence shows. Reread what you've written when the time is up. There's probably a nugget of gold that you can use somewhere in the middle of that writing. Find it and try using it. Another strategy is to walk the dog and think about the question and your evidence while you're walking. Sometimes peace and play can do that for us. A third strategy is to talk to a friend about your questions and your thoughts about it, because sometimes sharing and talking it through brings answers. A strategy I often use when I have writer's block and I just can't think of that insight that should come from the evidence is to distract myself. And you can try this. Do something mindless that will leave your mind free but keep your hands busy. In my case, it's hand washing the dishes or tidying my room. But there are things that you can figure out for yourself that would do the same thing. Once you've done that, return to your writing, often leaving your mind free and focusing on something else. Create some kind of a brainwave or a fresh start. And of course, we always welcome you at the Writing Center because we can help you get started. If you spend 2 hours in your room in the early hours of the morning trying to get started and you can't, then give us a call or register with us and make an appointment. We really can help. Once you finish the middle of your paper, then read it over and do write your conclusions, including your answer to the question you're answering. It's really important that you be able to find that answer, and you will probably find it in the conclusion. Once you've found it, then return to the introduction, the beginning of your paper, and write it. But do make sure that you check your thesis statement or your research question directly with the answer you gave in your conclusion to make sure the content is consistent. One of the biggest problems with papers is that the thesis statement or research question says one thing and the conclusion at the end of the paper says something different. So once you've finished, that's a really important check to make. Once you've finished your first draft, your next step is to move on to the second. So save your work, copy it over into a new file, or save it under a different name, and begin revising for your second draft. There are 2 types of revisions. The first is for structure, making major changes to the middle of your paper for flow and organization. Later on in this video, I'll talk about the second level revisions, which is revising your sentences. So professional writers add, delete, and move paragraphs around freely to create a smooth flow for their paper. So what you're looking for when you reread your first draft is a logical sequence of main points. You're looking for repetition because you want to remove places where you say the same thing. You're also looking for gaps. That is where you jumped over a point and the gap is clear. You need to fill in those places. Once you are certain that the order of your work is okay, you need to check your paragraphing. When I ask, is each paragraph well developed? Generally speaking, different types of paragraphs have different functions. But when you are doing analysis, generally speaking, each paragraph should describe evidence that you found, tell us the meaning of the evidence, conclude, and it should also have an introductory sentence to tell us about the topic. One thing that I find in students' work these days is long blocks of text that aren't properly broken up into paragraphs. So check to see if you have a long block of text, if you need to break it up. Have you changed topics in mid-paragraph? I would also ask you to see the video about organizing your argument for more help with checking for flow and structure. You can also visually check paragraph length by viewing multiple pages. And what you're looking for is if each paragraph is about the same length, or are you seeing some really short or really long paragraphs? In all probability, those really short 2 to 3 line paragraphs need further development, and those really long, longer than 3/4 of a page paragraphs need breaking up. The second set of revisions that you make are to your sentences. One of the first things you need to do is make sure each sentence is a reasonable length. If you have a sentence that's more than about 2.5 lines long, that's probably too long. Long sentences tend to run into grammatical errors. And remember that your work in all academic papers is to ensure that your readers don't have to work to understand your content. So check for sentence length. Check to make sure each sentence forwards the action, by which I mean each sentence tells us something we haven't already heard. And check as well to make sure that each sentence's meaning is clear. You should be using the terminology or the vocabulary of the field that you're working in. But get rid of the idea that complicated long sentences and 10-syllable words are good academic writing. They're not. We seek clarity, we seek conciseness. We also seek flow. Once you have gone through your sentences, spell check your work always. Always, always, always before you hand it in. You may also find a grammar checker useful to test for grammar errors. Proofreading your paper is a final step. It means reading from beginning to ending thoroughly and carefully. The best method is to try to leave your paper for at least a day without looking at it so that you forget the content before you read it through. Try as well reading your paper out loud, focusing on every word to make sure that no words are missing and to make sure the content makes sense. And of course, I assume that you have been incorporating citations for your evidence as you have written the middle, the ending, and the introduction to your paper. Make sure that you credit the work done by any other author or corporation at the place you used it in your text, and that you include that in your works cited or your reference section. And finally, look upon the Writing Center as your friend. We do not judge you. We don't seek to fix you or your writing because, frankly, we don't think you or your writing need to be fixed. Writing is learning for life, and coming to us for one or a series of our free 50-minute video chats about your writing can stand you in good stead for life. We also offer 15-minute drop-in appointments for quick questions. We run workshops every term on specific aspects of writing. Consider the Writing Center as a learning opportunity, the chance to work with knowledgeable writers. And of course, come to our website, click to register, and you can then book your own appointments. Or you can search for us as Writing Center on York's site. Thank you for listening, and I hope you found this video helpful.